$80,000 a year. Say that number out loud and it sounds like you're doing well. It sits above the median full-time wage. It clears six figures in a lot of people's minds. Tell someone at a dinner party and they might even nod with a quiet respect. But in 2026, $80,000 a year in Australia is not what it used to be. And for a growing number of people earning exactly that, the month ends with almost nothing left. Here is why. Start with what actually lands in your account. On $80,000 after income tax and the Medicare levy, your take-home pay is roughly $62,800 a year. That is about $1,208 a week. Not bad on paper. But the paper version of this wage and the lived version are two completely different things. Because the moment that money arrives, Australia starts taking it back. And it does not take it back all at once. It takes it back in layers. Rent first, then food, then the bills, then the costs you almost forgot to count. By the time each layer has had its share, the number that sounded comfortable has become something else entirely. The first and biggest claim on that $1,208 is rent. If you live in Sydney, the median rent right now is sitting near $824 a week. That is not a luxury apartment. That is not harbour views. That is the middle of the market, the ordinary option. The one that requires no particular taste or ambition, just a place to sleep and store your things. $824 a week on a take-home pay of $1,208 a week. That is 68 cents in every dollar gone before you have bought a single thing. Melbourne is not much better. Perth has surged over the past 3 years in a way that caught a lot of people off guard. Brisbane, which used to be the affordable alternative for people priced out of Sydney, has followed. Adelaide has tightened. Even the cities that used to offer relief have closed that door. Across every major capital, the rental market has made the same calculation impossible to escape. If you share, you buy yourself some room. But sharing at 30 is different to sharing at 22, and not everyone has that option. If you move to the outer suburbs, you trade rent for commute costs and often for hours of your life every week that you do not get back. If you leave the city entirely, you may leave the job market that earned you the $80,000 in the first place. Many industries simply do not exist outside the capitals at the salary level that makes any of this math work. There is no clean exit. Let's say you find a share situation or a cheaper pocket of the city and you land at $550 a week in rent. That is already a significant achievement in most capital cities right now. That $550 takes $28,600 a year, already almost half the take-home pay, and you have not eaten yet. Food is the next line. Grocery prices in Australia have become a political issue, a dinner table argument, and a genuine source of stress for ordinary households. The two major supermarkets have faced scrutiny over pricing practices. The conversation has reached Parliament, and yet the weekly shop keeps costing more. The average weekly grocery spend is sitting around $207. A single person being deliberate and cooking from scratch can trim that to $150 or $160. But add a coffee on the way to work, one meal out on the weekend, and a birthday dinner you actually attend, and that number climbs back past $200 without you noticing. Food is the category where discipline helps, but only so much. You cannot cut your way to zero. You have to eat. Call it $180 a week. That is $9,360 a year. Then there are the bills that just exist. Power, gas, water, internet, phone. The baseline cost of keeping a home operational in 2026 runs to somewhere between $85 and $100 a week once it is all added up. The electricity component alone has roughly doubled over the past decade. Solar helps if you own your home. If you rent, you take the bill as it comes. The government talks about energy relief measures. The quarterly statement arrives anyway, and the number on it keeps climbing. Internet and a phone plan together add another $30 to $50 a month, depending on your provider and what you need. These are not luxuries anymore. They are the infrastructure of modern employment. Trying to hold down a job without reliable internet and a working phone is not a realistic option for most people. Call it $90 a week, $4,680 a year. So now let us run the actual numbers. Rent at $28,600, food at $9,360, utilities at $4,680. That is $42,640 gone from a take-home pay of $62,800. What remains is $20,160 for the year, around $388 a week. That $388 is meant to cover transport, health insurance, clothing, car costs or public transport, streaming services, a haircut, a dentist visit, a new pair of shoes, a friend's wedding, a parking fine, a sick day, a phone screen replacement, a prescription, a bus fare when the car does not start, and every other normal human cost of being alive in a functioning society. A car easily absorbs $150 a week once fuel, registration, insurance, and the inevitable service are included. That figure assumes nothing goes seriously wrong. One unexpected repair and the weekly number jumps significantly. Basic private health cover costs between $30 and $50 a week depending on your age and fund. Without it, a single hospital stay can create a debt that takes months to clear. A daily train commute in a capital city runs around $50 a week. By the time those three line items are paid, the $388 is already gone. In fact, it is worse than gone. Those three items alone come to $230 to $250 a week on their own, which means the actual discretionary buffer left over is somewhere between $130 and $150. That is the number, not $388, not $80,000. The real number at the end of the real week for a real person living a relatively modest life in a capital city is somewhere around $140. And we have not touched savings. We have not touched an emergency fund. We have not touched a holiday, a gym membership, a streaming service, a date, a gift, or a single non-essential purchase. This is what $80,000 a year actually looks like in 2026. Not the number, the life behind it. Here is the part that makes it harder to accept. $80,000 does not feel like a struggling wage. It is above average. It requires real skills or real experience or real time in the workforce to reach. Most people earning it worked for it. They studied. They showed up. They moved up. They did the things they were told would lead to a comfortable life. And yet, the outcomes it produces right now. The tight weekly budget, the inability to save meaningfully, the sense that nothing is getting further ahead, are outcomes that used to belong to people earning far less. That is not a personal failing. That is the result of housing costs, energy costs, and food costs, all rising faster than wages for the better part of a decade. The wage went up. The life it buys went down. That gap is the real story. In the early 2000s, a household on $80,000 could comfortably rent in most capital cities, save a deposit within a few years, and carry a reasonable expectation of eventually owning property. That trajectory no longer exists in Sydney or Melbourne for someone on this wage alone. The deposit target has moved faster than the ability to save it. Every year of saving is chased by another year of rising prices. The finish line keeps moving. And that is a structural problem, not a budgeting problem. No spreadsheet fixes it. Debt makes the picture worse for a large share of people in this income bracket. A car loan at $150 a week in repayments costs nearly $8,000 a year. A credit card carrying a $5,000 balance at a 20% interest rate adds roughly $1,000 in interest charges before a single dollar of the principal is reduced. Buy now, pay later services, which now sit embedded in almost every checkout in the country, can quietly absorb $80 to $100 a week across multiple small plans that each feel harmless on their own. The person on $80,000 who carries all three of these is effectively living on considerably less, with the added pressure of knowing the debt is not shrinking. This is one of the main reasons the wage feels so tight for so many. It is not just the cost of living. It is the cost of living plus the cost of credit, used to bridge the gaps that living already created. Clearing that debt is hard. But the people who do it consistently describe the experience as feeling like a pay rise. Because it is. Every dollar that stops going to interest starts going somewhere that actually builds a life. Superannuation is one of the quieter parts of this equation that deserves more attention. From the 1st of July 2025, the superannuation guarantee rate moved to 12%. On an $80,000 wage, that means your employer is putting $9,600 a year into a super fund on top of your salary. Over a 30 to 35 year career with reasonable investment returns, that alone should produce a meaningful retirement balance. But the detail matters. Australians in high fee funds, or funds sitting in the wrong investment option by default, lose tens of thousands of dollars over a working life without ever noticing because the cost never appears on a payslip. Checking your fund, choosing low fees, consolidating old accounts, and making sure your balance is in an appropriate growth option are not complicated tasks. They take an hour, and they can make the difference of years of additional retirement security. There are clear patterns among the Australians who do make genuine progress on incomes like this. The first is obsessive control over housing costs. Anyone who keeps rent or mortgage repayments below 30% of take-home pay has room to maneuver. Anyone paying significantly more is fighting a war they are unlikely to win, no matter how disciplined they are everywhere else. Housing is the lever that determines almost everything. Getting it right often means making an unpopular choice, a less desirable suburb, a share house for longer than feels comfortable, a smaller place than expected. But the people who make that compromise early tend to build faster than those who prioritize the address. The second is automating wealth before lifestyle, moving a fixed amount, even $150 a week, into a high interest savings account or a low cost index fund the moment pay arrives, before the rest of the week has a chance to absorb it. Not what is left over at the end of Friday. The first transfer on payday, treated like a bill that cannot be skipped. The people who build wealth on average wages almost universally do this. The people who feel like they are going backwards almost universally do not. The difference between these two groups is rarely intelligence or income. It is usually just the order in which they pay themselves. The third is treating income as a variable, not a ceiling. Cutting costs on $80,000 has a hard floor. There is only so much to cut before the quality of life becomes genuinely grim, and the effort stops being worth the result. But income can move. A credential, a negotiation, a job switch, a side income, adding $15,000 to an $80,000 base lifts take-home pay by around $10,000 after tax. That $10,000 is the difference between a budget that breathes and one that suffocates. It is the difference between a savings plan that works and one that exists only in theory. Focusing energy on growing the number, not just managing it, tends to produce better long-term outcomes than cutting alone ever will. The fourth is staying aware of the small, recurring costs that quietly compound. The subscriptions that renewed without notice, the insurance policy that has not been compared in 3 years, the phone plan that costs $30 a month more than a competitor's equivalent. None of these individually are significant. Together, across a year, they can easily add up to $1,500 or $2,000 in spending that delivered nothing. One afternoon, a year spent reviewing every recurring charge and comparing the major bills tends to pay for itself many times over. So why is $80,000 simply not enough? Not because the number is small in absolute terms. Not because the people earning it are doing anything wrong. Not because they failed to budget or chose the wrong priorities or missed some obvious path that everyone else found. It is not enough because the system around it has changed. Because the costs that a middle income was always supposed to cover, shelter, food, energy, a modest buffer for the unexpected, now consume it almost entirely. Because the relationship between wages and housing, which held a rough equilibrium for most of the post-war period, broke down. And the consequences of that are now being felt most acutely by exactly the people who thought they had done enough to escape them. $80,000 used to mean stability. It used to mean a deposit saved within a few years, a holiday taken without stress, a car replaced without a loan, A buffer that made ordinary setbacks manageable rather than catastrophic. Today, it means keeping up. And in Sydney, in Melbourne, in Brisbane, in Perth, in most places where the work that pays $80,000 actually exists, it does not always even mean that. The number has not moved as fast as the world around it. And until that changes, through policy, through the housing market, through wage growth that genuinely outpaces costs, the gap between what $80,000 sounds like and what it actually delivers will keep getting wider. That gap has a name. Most people earning $80,000 right now are living inside it. If this breakdown made the numbers finally make sense, hit the like button. It helps other Australians find this content when they need it most. Subscribe if you have not yet, and turn on notifications so you do not miss the next one.